Background and beginning. The story begins in the bustling city of Chicago, a metropolis known for its towering skyscrapers, vibrant culture and, unfortunately, a long history of organized crime. Over the past few months, a series of high-profile bank robberies have shaken the city to its core. These weren't your average smash-and-grab heists. They were meticulously planned, executed with military precision, and left behind a trail of blood and fear. The perpetrators, a shadowy group of criminals who seemed to vanish into thin air after every job, leaving law enforcement baffled and the public terrified. The first robbery took place on a cold January morning at a downtown branch of one of the nation's largest banks. It was business as usual, tellers counting cash, customers waiting in line, when chaos erupted. A group of masked individuals stormed the building, armed with semi-automatic rifles and handguns. Within minutes, they had subdued the security guards, forced the employees to open the vault, and made off with over $2 million in cash. The entire operation lasted less than 5 minutes, and by the time the police arrived, the robbers were long gone. What shocked investigators the most wasn't just the speed of the heist, but the sheer ruthlessness of the criminals. 2 security guards and a customer were shot dead, not because they resisted, but seemingly as a warning to anyone who might think of interfering. The media quickly picked up on the story, dubbing the group the Phantom Crew due to their ability to disappear without a trace. But this was only the beginning. Over the next 3 months, similar robberies occurred in neighboring states, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Each time the crew struck with the same level of precision and brutality, leaving behind a growing body count. The FBI was called in to assist local law enforcement, but the lack of evidence made progress slow. Surveillance footage showed the robbers wearing identical masks and dark clothing, their faces and identities completely concealed. They left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses who could identify them. It was as if they were ghosts. As the investigation deepened, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The crew didn't just rob banks, they killed anyone who got in their way. Security guards, bank employees, even innocent bystanders were gunned down without hesitation. The brutality of their crimes suggested that this was no ordinary gang. These were professionals, possibly ex-military or law enforcement, who knew how to handle weapons and execute complex operations. But who were they? And more importantly, who was leading them? Rumors began to circulate about a mysterious figure known only as Director X. According to whispers in the criminal underworld, this person was the mastermind behind the crew, orchestrating every heist from the shadows. Some said he was a former soldier turned rogue, others claimed he was a disgraced corporate executive with a grudge against the system. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Director X was no ordinary criminal. He was a strategist, a manipulator, and a killer. The fear and paranoia in Chicago reached a fever pitch. Banks across the city increased their security measures, hiring armed guards and installing state-of-the-art surveillance systems, but it wasn't enough. The Phantom Crew struck again, this time targeting a suburban bank in broad daylight. They killed 3 more people, including a mother of 2, who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The public outcry was immediate, with citizens demanding answers and justice. The mayor held a press conference vowing to bring the criminals to justice, but behind closed doors, law enforcement was struggling. The crew was always one step ahead, and the pressure to catch them was mounting. For the FBI, the case became a top priority. Special Agent Sarah Whitman, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for cracking impossible cases, was assigned to lead the task force. Whitman quickly realized that this wasn't just about catching a group of bank robbers, it was about dismantling a highly organized criminal enterprise. "This isn't random," she told her team during their first briefing. "These people are professionals. They have resources, they have training, and they have a leader who knows exactly what he's doing. If we're going to stop them, we need to think like them." As the investigation unfolded, Whitman and her team began to uncover a web of connections that stretched far beyond Chicago. The Phantom Crew wasn't just robbing banks, they were involved in arms trafficking, money laundering, and possibly even contract killings. Their operations were sophisticated, their network extensive, and their leader, Director X, remained an enigma. But Whitman was determined to bring him down, no matter the cost. The stage was set for a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with lives hanging in the balance. The Phantom Crew had terrorized the Midwest for months, but their reign of terror was about to face its greatest challenge yet: a relentless FBI task force that wouldn't rest until justice was served. The first bank robbery. It was a frigid January morning in downtown Chicago, the kind of day where the wind cuts through even the thickest coats. The streets were bustling with the usual weekday crowd, business people rushing to work, coffee in hand, and delivery trucks weaving through traffic. Inside the First National Bank, one of the city's oldest and most prestigious financial institutions, the day had started like any other. Tellers were busy counting cash, customers were filling out deposit slips, and the security guards stood at their posts, chatting idly about the upcoming football playoffs. No one had any idea that within minutes, their lives would be turned upside down. At exactly 9:03 a.m., a black van pulled up to the curb outside the bank. The vehicle had no license plates and its windows were tinted so dark that no one could see inside. The van idled for a moment, almost as if the driver was waiting for a signal. Then, the side door slid open, and 4 masked individuals jumped out, each armed with semi-automatic rifles. They moved with military precision, their boots hitting the pavement in unison as they approached the bank's entrance. The first to enter was a tall figure wearing a black ski mask and a tactical vest. He carried a rifle slung across his chest and barked orders the moment he stepped through the door. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" he shouted, his voice booming and authoritative. The other 3 followed closely behind, fanning out across the lobby. One of them, a smaller figure who appeared to be a woman, immediately headed toward the security guards. Without hesitation, she raised her weapon and fired 2 shots, hitting both guards in the chest before they could even reach for their guns. The sound of gunfire echoed through the marble lobby, sending customers and employees into a panic. "Stay down! Don't move!" another masked robber yelled, pointing his rifle at a group of terrified customers huddled near the teller counters. One man, an older gentleman in a suit, hesitated for a moment, seemingly frozen in fear. The leader of the group didn't wait. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling, sending chunks of plaster raining down. "I said get down!" he roared, and the man dropped to the floor, trembling. Meanwhile, the 4th member of the crew, a stocky individual with a duffel bag, vaulted over the counter and began ordering the tellers to open the cash drawers. "Hurry up! Don't make me ask twice!" he growled, slamming the butt of his rifle against the counter for emphasis. The tellers, their hands shaking, complied as quickly as they could, stuffing bundles of cash into the bag. One of them, a young woman named Emily, accidentally dropped a stack of bills on the floor. The robber glared at her but didn't say a word. He simply bent down, scooped up the money, and continued filling the bag. In the back of the bank, the manager, a middle-aged man named Robert, was frantically trying to press the silent alarm button under his desk. But one of the robbers had anticipated this. The smaller figure, the one who had shot the guards, appeared out of nowhere, her rifle trained on him. "Don't even think about it," she said coldly, her voice muffled by the mask. Robert froze, his hand hovering inches above the button. "Good choice," she added, before motioning for him to stand up and join the others in the lobby. By 9:06 a.m., the crew had emptied the cash drawers and moved on to the vault. The leader, who seemed to have an uncanny knowledge of the bank's layout, directed the stocky robber to plant a small explosive on the vault door. "Clear the area," he ordered, and the crew took cover as the device detonated with a deafening boom. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing stacks of cash and safety deposit boxes. The robbers wasted no time, grabbing as much as they could carry. Outside, the black van remained parked at the curb, its engine still running. A 5th member of the crew, the getaway driver, sat behind the wheel, scanning the street for any signs of trouble. He had a police scanner on the dashboard, and so far, it had been silent. But he knew they were working against the clock. 2 minutes, he said into a walkie-talkie, his voice calm but firm. "Wrap it up." Back inside, the leader checked his watch and nodded. "Time's up! Let's move!" he shouted. The crew quickly gathered their loot and began making their way toward the exit. But just as they were about to leave, a customer, a young man in his 20s, made a desperate attempt to be a hero. He lunged at one of the robbers, trying to wrestle the rifle out of their hands. It was a brave but foolish move. The leader didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired a single shot, hitting the man square in the chest. The young man collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath him as the other customers screamed in horror. "Anyone else?" the leader asked, his voice dripping with menace. No one dared to move. At 9:08 a.m., the crew exited the bank, carrying duffel bags stuffed with cash. They climbed into the van, which sped off before the sound of the gunshot had even faded. By the time the first police cars arrived on the scene, the robbers were long gone, leaving behind a scene of chaos and devastation. 3 people were dead, the 2 security guards and the young man who had tried to intervene. Several others were injured, and everyone in the bank was traumatized. The police immediately cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence, but there was little to go on. The robbers had worn gloves, leaving no fingerprints, and the masks concealed their identities. Surveillance footage showed them entering and exiting the bank, but their faces were completely obscured. The only clue was the black van, which was later found abandoned in an alley a few miles away. It had been wiped clean of any evidence. The media descended on the scene, broadcasting live updates and interviewing witnesses. The story dominated the news cycle for days, with headlines like "Deadly Heist Shocks Chicago" and "Who are the Phantom Crew?" The public was outraged, demanding answers and justice. But for the police and the FBI, the case was just beginning. They knew they were dealing with a highly organized and dangerous group, one that wouldn't stop until they were caught, or until they decided to disappear for good. This was no ordinary bank robbery. It was the opening act in a much larger, more sinister operation. And at the center of it all was the enigmatic figure known only as Director X, a criminal mastermind who had just declared war on the system. The string of heists. The first robbery at the First National Bank of Chicago was only the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the Phantom Crew, as the media had dubbed them, unleashed a wave of terror across the Midwest. Their operations were as precise as they were brutal, leaving a trail of blood and fear in their wake. Each heist seemed to escalate in both scale and violence, and law enforcement agencies across multiple states were left scrambling to keep up. The second robbery occurred just 2 weeks after the Chicago heist, this time in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a quiet Tuesday morning at a suburban branch of a regional bank. The crew struck just as the bank opened, catching the staff off guard. Witnesses described the same modus operandi, a black van pulling up to the curb, masked individuals storming the building, and chaos erupting within seconds. This time, they killed a security guard and a bank manager who had hesitated to open the vault. The crew made off with nearly $1.5 million in cash, disappearing before the police could even respond. The van was later found abandoned in a parking garage, wiped clean of any evidence. The Indianapolis robbery confirmed what investigators had feared. The Chicago heist wasn't an isolated incident. This was a coordinated campaign, and the Phantom Crew was just getting started. The FBI officially took over the case, forming a multi-state task force to track the group. Special Agent Sarah Whitman, the lead investigator, described the crew as highly disciplined, highly dangerous, and completely ruthless. She warned that the group's willingness to kill without hesitation made them a threat not just to banks, but to anyone who crossed their path. The third robbery took place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at a downtown bank located just blocks from the city's police headquarters. The audacity of the crew was staggering. They struck during the lunch hour, when the bank was at its busiest, ensuring maximum chaos. This time they used smoke grenades to disorient the staff and customers, creating a scene of utter pandemonium. In the confusion, they shot and killed a police officer who had been off-duty and happened to be in the bank at the time. The officer had tried to intervene, drawing his weapon, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. The crew escaped with over $2 million, leaving behind a city in mourning. By now, the Phantom Crew had become a household name. News outlets ran 24/7's coverage of the robberies, speculating about the identities of the masked criminals and their mysterious leader, Director X. The public was gripped by both fear and fascination. Who were these people? How were they able to strike with such precision and vanish without a trace? And why were they so willing to kill? The fourth robbery occurred in Grand Rapids, Michigan, at a bank located in a quiet residential neighborhood. This time, the crew added a new layer of brutality to their operation. After securing the cash, they took a bank employee hostage, using her as a human shield to ensure their escape. The woman, a single mother of 2, was later found alive but traumatized, abandoned, in a remote field several miles from the city. She told investigators that the crew had been cold and methodical, showing no emotion as they carried out their plan. They didn't care about anyone, she said through tears. They just wanted the money. The hostage incident marked a turning point in the investigation. The FBI now had a living witness who could provide some insight into the crew's behavior and tactics. The woman described the leader as a tall man with a commanding presence, someone who spoke with authority and seemed to control the group with an iron fist. She also mentioned a smaller figure, possibly a woman, who appeared to be the leader's second-in-command. This corroborated earlier reports from the Chicago and Indianapolis robberies, where witnesses had described a similar dynamic. Despite the new information, the task force was no closer to catching the crew. The group's ability to evade capture was almost supernatural. They left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no digital footprints. Their vehicles were always stolen and abandoned, their weapons untraceable. It was as if they had thought of everything. Special Agent Whitman began to suspect that the crew had inside knowledge of law enforcement procedures, possibly from a former cop or military operative. "These aren't amateurs," she told her team during a briefing. "They know exactly how we operate, and they're using it against us." The fifth robbery was the most shocking yet. It took place in St. Louis, Missouri at a major downtown bank during rush hour. This time the crew used explosives to breach the vault, causing significant damage to the building. The blast injured several employees and customers, and the crew shot 2 more people during their escape. The level of violence was unprecedented, even for the Phantom crew. It was clear that they were becoming more desperate, or more emboldened. The St. Louis heist also introduced a new element to the investigation, a manifesto. After the crew fled, investigators found a handwritten note left behind in the vault. It read, "The system is broken. We take what we deserve. You can't stop us. X." The note was the first direct communication from Director X, and it sent chills down the spines of everyone involved in the case. Was this just about money, or was there a deeper motive? Was the crew trying to make a statement, or was this simply a taunt to law enforcement? The manifesto added a new layer of complexity to an already baffling case. As the task force worked tirelessly to track the crew, the public's fear turned to anger. Protests erupted in several cities, with citizens demanding better protection and accountability from their leaders. Banks across the Midwest implemented new security measures including armed guards and advanced surveillance systems. But none of it seemed to matter. The Phantom crew continued to strike with impunity, always staying one step ahead. By the end of the 3rd month, the crew had stolen over $10 million and claimed the lives of 12 people. The FBI was under immense pressure to deliver results, but the crew's trail had gone cold. Special Agent Whitman knew that time was running out. "They're not going to stop," she told her team. "The only question is, where will they strike next?" Unbeknownst to the task force, the crew was already planning their next move, a heist that would make all the others look like child's play. And at the center of it all was Director X, a criminal mastermind who seemed to thrive on chaos and violence. The stage was set for a showdown, but the question remained. Could the FBI catch the Phantom crew before they struck again? Or would Director X continue to elude justice, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake? The discovery of Director X. For months, the Phantom crew had been a faceless, nameless entity, a shadowy group of criminals who struck with precision and disappeared without a trace. Law enforcement agencies across the Midwest were chasing ghosts, piecing together fragments of evidence that led nowhere. But as the body count rose and the heists grew bolder, one name began to surface in hushed whispers: Director X. At first it was nothing more than a rumor, a nickname tossed around by informants in the criminal underworld. But as the FBI dug deeper, it became clear that this wasn't just a myth. Director X was real, and he was the mastermind behind the most dangerous criminal enterprise the Midwest had seen in decades. The first concrete mention of Director X came from an unlikely source, a low-level arms dealer arrested in Detroit. During an interrogation, the dealer admitted to selling untraceable weapons to a group of masked individuals who fit the description of the Phantom crew. When pressed for more details, he hesitated, clearly terrified. "I don't know their names," he stammered. "They don't talk much, but they kept mentioning someone, X, like X wants this or X needs that. I figured it was their boss or something." The dealer's fear was palpable, and when asked why he was so afraid, he simply shook his head. "You don't mess with X. People who cross him, they don't last long." This was the first time the FBI had heard the name X in connection with the Phantom crew, and it sent a ripple of excitement and dread through the task force. Who was this person? Was X just a code name, or was it tied to a real identity? Special Agent Sarah Whitman, the lead investigator, immediately ordered her team to dig into the name. "If this X is their leader," she said during a briefing, "then he's the key to everything. Find him, and we find the crew." As the investigation progressed, more mentions of Director X began to surface. A former gang member in Milwaukee, picked up on unrelated charges, claimed to have overheard a conversation about a big boss who was organizing heists across state lines. "They called him Director X," the man said, "like he's running some kind of movie or something. Everything's planned out down to the second. He's not just some thug, he's smart, real smart." The gang member also mentioned that X had a reputation for being ruthless, using fear and violence to keep his crew in line. "You don't question him," he added. "You just do what he says, or you're done." The picture of Director X that began to emerge was chilling. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a strategist, someone who treated crime like a business. He operated in the shadows, never showing his face, and communicated with his crew through intermediaries or encrypted messages. He was meticulous, leaving no room for error, and he demanded absolute loyalty. Those who failed him, or betrayed him, were dealt with swiftly and brutally. One informant claimed that X had once ordered the execution of a crew member who had accidentally left behind a piece of evidence at a crime scene. "They found the guy in a ditch," the informant said. "No hands, no face. That's how S sends a message." The FBI began to suspect that Director X wasn't just a criminal mastermind, he was a psychological manipulator. He had created a cult-like atmosphere within the Phantom crew, using fear and loyalty to maintain control. Special Agent Whitman theorized that X might have a background in the military or law enforcement, given the crew's tactical precision and knowledge of police procedures. "This isn't someone who just woke up one day and decided to rob banks," she told her team. "This is someone with training, someone who knows how to plan, how to lead, and how to stay one step ahead." The breakthrough came when the FBI intercepted a series of encrypted messages sent between members of the Phantom crew. The messages, recovered from a burner phone found at the scene of the St. Louis heist, were heavily coded, but one phrase stood out: "Directive from X." It was the first direct evidence linking Director X to the crew's operations. The messages also revealed a level of organization that stunned investigators. X wasn't just giving orders, he was micromanaging every detail, from the timing of the heists, to the escape routes, to the disposal of evidence. "This guy isn't just a leader," one agent remarked, "he's a control freak." As the FBI continued to piece together the puzzle, they began to uncover a pattern in the crew's movements. The heists weren't random, they were part of a larger strategy. Each bank targeted was located near major highways, allowing for quick getaways. The crew avoided banks with advanced security systems, suggesting that X had access to insider information. And most chillingly, the crew seemed to be escalating their violence with each heist, as if testing the limits of what they could get away with. "It's like he's playing a game," Agent Whitman said. "And we're the pawns." The task force also discovered that Director X had a knack for recruiting the perfect team. Each member of the Phantom crew had a specific role: the leader who commanded the heists, the enforcer who handled security, the tech expert who disabled alarms, and the driver who ensured their escape. It was a well-oiled machine, and X was the one pulling the strings. But who was he? Despite their progress, the FBI still had no idea of his true identity. Was he a former soldier, a disgraced cop, a criminal mastermind who had risen from the streets? The possibilities were endless, and the lack of answers was maddening. Then came the manifesto. After the St. Louis heist, investigators found a handwritten note left behind in the vault. It read, "The system is broken. We take what we deserve. You can't stop us. X." The manifesto was a turning point in the case. It was the first time Director X had directly addressed law enforcement, and it revealed a glimpse of his mindset. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and perhaps even ideology. The note suggested that X saw himself as a revolutionary, someone who was striking back at a corrupt system. But was this genuine, or was it just another layer of manipulation? Agent Whitman wasn't sure. "He's either a true believer," she said, "or he's using this as a smokescreen to justify his crimes. Either way, it makes him even more dangerous." The discovery of Director X changed everything. He was no longer just a shadowy figure in the background. He was the focal point of the investigation. The FBI knew that if they could unmask him, they could dismantle the entire operation. But X was a ghost, and every lead seemed to end in a dead end. The task force was racing against time, knowing that the next heist could be even deadlier. And somewhere out there, Director X was watching, planning his next move and staying one step ahead. The murder of a witness. The murder of a key witness marked a dark turning point in the Phantom crew investigation. Up until that moment, The crew had been known for their ruthless efficiency during their heists, but this act of calculated violence outside the context of a robbery sent a chilling message. No one was safe. Not even those who weren't directly involved in their crimes. It was a stark reminder of the lengths Director X and his crew were willing to go to protect their operation and maintain their anonymity. The victim, 42-year-old Michael Harris, was a bank employee at a small branch in Milwaukee. He had been working as a security consultant for the bank and was present during the crew's third heist. Although he had complied with their demands and avoided confrontation, Harris had seen something that no one else had, a fleeting glimpse of one of the robbers' faces. During the chaos of the robbery, one of the crew members had briefly removed their mask to adjust it, and Harris, crouched behind a desk, had caught a clear look at their features. He didn't think much of it at the time, he was too focused on surviving. But after the crew fled, he realized the significance of what he had seen. Harris immediately reported the incident to the police, providing a detailed description of the robber's face. It wasn't much, but it was the first real lead investigators had in the case. The FBI quickly placed Harris under protective custody, knowing that his testimony could be crucial in identifying at least one member of the Phantom crew. Special Agent Sarah Whitman, who was leading the task force, personally assured Harris that he would be safe. "We'll protect you," she told him. "You're doing the right thing." For a few weeks it seemed like the plan was working. Harris was moved to a safe house in a quiet suburb, guarded around the clock by federal agents. He cooperated fully with the investigation, working with a sketch artist to create a composite image of the robber he had seen. The sketch was distributed internally among law enforcement agencies, and while it didn't immediately lead to any arrests, it was a step forward in a case that had been frustratingly stagnant. But Director X was always watching. Somehow, despite the FBI's best efforts to keep Harris's identity and location a secret, the Phantom crew learned about the witness and the threat he posed to their operation. It was a testament to the crew's extensive network and resources. Whether through bribery, hacking, or sheer cunning, they had managed to penetrate the FBI's protective measures. And once they knew about Harris, they acted with the same cold precision that had defined all their crimes. On a rainy Thursday night, just 3 weeks after the Milwaukee heist, Harris was found dead in his safe house. The scene was brutal and methodical, a signature of the Phantom crew's ruthlessness. The 2 federal agents assigned to protect him had been killed first, their bodies discovered in the front hallway. Both had been shot execution style, a single bullet to the back of the head. There were no signs of a struggle, suggesting that the killers had caught the agents off guard, likely using silencers to avoid drawing attention. Harris's body was found in the living room. He had been tied to a chair, his hands and feet bound with zip ties. The autopsy later revealed that he had been tortured before his death, likely in an attempt to extract information about what he had told the FBI. His face was bruised, his ribs broken, and his fingernails showed signs of being ripped out. But Harris had refused to talk. In the end, the killers had slit his throat, leaving him to bleed out in the middle of the room. On the wall behind him, written in his own blood, was a chilling message: "No witnesses. X." The discovery of Harris's body sent shockwaves through the FBI and the public. For the task force, it was a devastating blow. Not only had they lost a key witness, but the murder also exposed vulnerabilities in their protective measures. "This wasn't just a murder," Special Agent Whitman said during a press conference. "This was a message. Director X wants us to know that he's watching, that he's willing to do whatever it takes to protect his operation. But let me be clear, we will not be intimidated. We will bring him to justice." The murder also raised troubling questions about how the Phantom crew had located Harris. Was there a mole within law enforcement? Had the crew hacked into FBI communications? Or was it simply a case of human error, a slip-up that had cost 3 lives? The task force launched an internal investigation, but no definitive answers were found. The lack of clarity only added to the growing sense of paranoia within the team. "If they can get to Harris," one agent remarked, "they can get to any of us." The public reaction was equally intense. News of the murder dominated headlines, with commentators speculating about the identity of Director X and the extent of his power. The message left at the crime scene, "No witnesses," became a grim symbol of the crew's ruthlessness. Citizens across the Midwest were terrified not just of being caught in the crossfire of a robbery, but of becoming targets themselves. Banks increased their security measures, and some even temporarily closed their doors, unwilling to risk another attack. For the FBI, the murder of Michael Harris was a turning point. It was no longer just about stopping a series of robberies. It was about taking down a criminal organization that had proven itself capable of striking anywhere, anytime, with impunity. Special Agent Whitman doubled down on her efforts, pushing her team to uncover any leads that could bring them closer to Director X. "This isn't just a case anymore," she told her team. "This is a war, and we're not going to lose." The murder also had a profound psychological impact on the task force. Harris's death was a stark reminder of the stakes involved, and it fueled a sense of urgency among the agents. But it also created tension and fear. Some agents began to question whether they were truly prepared to face an adversary as cunning and ruthless as Director X. Others became obsessed with finding the mole they were convinced existed within their ranks. The pressure was immense and the cracks were beginning to show. Despite the setbacks, the task force pressed on. They analyzed every detail of the crime scene, hoping to find a clue that would lead them to the crew. But as always, the Phantom crew had covered their tracks. The weapons used in the murders were untraceable. The surveillance cameras near the safe house had been disabled, and the killers had left no fingerprints or DNA. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The murder of Michael Harris was a grim reminder of the Phantom crew's power and reach. It was a message not just to law enforcement, but to anyone who might consider coming forward with information. Director X was untouchable, and crossing him was a death sentence. But for Special Agent Whitman, the murder only strengthened her resolve. "They think they can scare us into backing down," she said, "but they're wrong. We're going to find them, and when we do, they'll pay for what they've done." The hunt for Director X had become personal, and the stakes had never been higher. The network of the Phantom crew. As the investigation into the Phantom crew deepened, the FBI began to uncover the vast and intricate network that supported their operations. What initially appeared to be a small, tightly knit group of bank robbers was revealed to be something far more complex, a sprawling criminal enterprise with connections that extended far beyond the Midwest. The Phantom crew wasn't just a gang, it was a highly organized syndicate, operating with the precision of a multinational corporation. And at the center of it all was the enigmatic Director X, whose influence and control reached into every corner of the operation. The first clue to the crew's larger network came from an unexpected source: a routine traffic stop in Ohio. A state trooper pulled over a van for a broken taillight, only to discover a cache of weapons and tactical gear in the back. The driver, a nervous young man in his early 20s, claimed he was just a courier, paid to deliver the items to an undisclosed location. When pressed for details, he admitted that he didn't know who had hired him. His instructions had come through an anonymous message on a burner phone. The FBI quickly took over the case, and while the driver had no direct connection to the Phantom crew, the items in the van matched the equipment used in their heists. It was the first tangible evidence that the crew wasn't working alone. They had suppliers, couriers, and likely a network of intermediaries who helped facilitate their crimes. As the task force dug deeper, they began to piece together the structure of the Phantom crew's operation. At the top was Director X, the mastermind who orchestrated every aspect of the heists. Below him was the core crew, the individuals who carried out the robberies with military precision. But beyond the core crew was a web of associates, each playing a specific role in the operation. There were arms dealers who provided untraceable weapons, tech experts who hacked into security systems, and forgers who created fake IDs and documents. There were also safe houses scattered across multiple states, where the crew could lay low between jobs. Each piece of the network was compartmentalized, ensuring that no one person had enough information to compromise the entire operation. One of the most surprising discoveries was the crew's use of technology. The Phantom crew wasn't just relying on brute force, they were leveraging cutting-edge tools to stay ahead of law enforcement. The FBI found evidence that the crew used encrypted communication apps to coordinate their activities, making it nearly impossible to intercept their messages. They also employed advanced surveillance techniques, using drones to scout potential targets and monitor police activity. In one instance, investigators discovered that the crew had hacked into a bank's internal security system weeks before a heist, allowing them to disable alarms and cameras remotely. "This isn't just a group of thugs with guns," Special Agent Sarah Whitman remarked during a briefing. "This is a sophisticated operation, and they're using every tool at their disposal to stay one step ahead. The crew's financial operations were equally sophisticated. The money stolen during the heist didn't just disappear, it was laundered through a series of shell companies, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions. The task force uncovered a network of fake businesses, ranging from construction firms to import-export companies, that were used to funnel the stolen cash. In one case, investigators traced a portion of the money to a luxury car dealership in Miami, where it had been used to purchase high-end vehicles that were later sold for clean cash. The complexity of the laundering process made it nearly impossible to track the full flow of funds, but it was clear that Director X had access to financial experts who knew how to cover their tracks. The Phantom Crew's network also extended into the criminal underworld. Informants reported that the crew had connections to various gangs and cartels, which provided additional resources and protection. In exchange, the crew shared a portion of their profits or offered their services for other criminal activities. For example, the crew was suspected of smuggling weapons for a cartel in exchange for access to safe houses along the US-Mexico border. These alliances made the crew even more dangerous, as they could call on additional manpower and resources if needed. One of the most chilling aspects of the network was its use of intimidation and violence to maintain control. Director X ruled with an iron fist, ensuring that everyone in the network remained loyal and silent. Those who disobeyed or posed a threat were dealt with swiftly and brutally. The murder of Michael Harris, the key witness in the Milwaukee heist, was just one example of the crew's willingness to eliminate anyone who got in their way. Informants also reported rumors of other killings, including the execution of a courier who had accidentally lost a shipment of weapons. X doesn't tolerate mistakes, one informant said. You screw up, you're done. The task force also discovered that the crew had a unique recruitment process. Director X didn't just hire anyone, he carefully selected individuals with specific skills and backgrounds. Many members of the network had military or law enforcement experience, giving them the training and discipline needed to carry out complex operations. Others were experts in fields like technology, finance, or logistics. Each recruit was vetted thoroughly, and once they joined the network, they were bound by a strict code of silence. This isn't just a job for them, Agent Whitman explained, it's a lifestyle, and once you're in, there's no way out. Despite the progress in mapping the network, the task force faced significant challenges. The crew's use of compartmentalization meant that most members of the network had no direct contact with Director X or the core crew. Even when arrests were made, the suspects had little information to offer. They're like pieces of a puzzle, one agent said. Each one gives us a little more of the picture, but we're still missing the most important piece, X. The scale and sophistication of the Phantom Crew's network were both impressive and terrifying. It was clear that Director X had built an empire, one that operated in the shadows and thrived on fear and secrecy. For the FBI, dismantling the network was like trying to take down a hydra. Every time they cut off one head, two more seemed to grow in its place. But Special Agent Whitman remained determined. "We're not just fighting a crew of bank robbers," she said. "We're fighting an entire system, and we're going to take it down piece by piece until there's nothing left." The discovery of the Phantom Crew's network was a turning point in the investigation. It revealed the true scale of the operation and the challenges that lay ahead. But it also provided a roadmap, a way to dismantle the empire that Director X had built. The task force knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were more determined than ever to bring the crew to justice. The question was no longer if they would catch Director X, but when. And with every new lead, they were getting closer to the man who had orchestrated it all. The nationwide manhunt. The manhunt for the Phantom Crew and their elusive leader, Director X, became one of the largest and most complex operations in the history of the FBI. What had started as a regional investigation into a series of bank robberies quickly escalated into a nationwide effort involving multiple federal agencies, state police, and even international partners. The scale of the operation reflected the growing realization that the Phantom Crew wasn't just a group of criminals, they were a highly organized, highly dangerous syndicate capable of striking anywhere, anytime. And with each passing day, the pressure to bring them to justice mounted. The turning point came after the murder of Michael Harris, the key witness in the Milwaukee heist. The brutal killing sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the public, and it became clear that the Phantom Crew was willing to go to any lengths to protect their operation. Special Agent Sarah Whitman, the head of the task force, knew that the stakes had never been higher. "This isn't just about catching bank robbers anymore," she told her team during a tense briefing. "This is about stopping a criminal empire, and we're not going to stop until we bring them down." Coordinating the manhunt. The first step in the manhunt was to centralize the investigation. The FBI established a command center in Chicago, the site of the crew's first known heist, and began coordinating efforts across multiple states. The task force grew exponentially, with agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, the U.S. Marshal Service, and even the Department of Homeland Security joining the effort. State and local police departments were also brought in, providing boots on the ground and local intelligence. The command center became a hive of activity with agents working around the clock to analyze evidence, track leads, and coordinate operations. Maps of the Midwest covered the walls, marked with pins and strings connecting the locations of the crew's heists, safe houses, and known associates. A digital timeline tracked every known movement of the crew, while analysts pored over surveillance footage, phone records, and financial transactions in search of patterns. "We're building a puzzle," Agent Whitman explained, "and every piece brings us closer to finding X." The role of technology played a critical role in the manhunt. The FBI's cybercrime division was tasked with tracking the crew's digital footprint, a daunting challenge given their use of encrypted communication and burner phones. Analysts worked tirelessly to decrypt messages, trace IP addresses, and identify patterns in the crew's online activity. In one breakthrough, they discovered that the crew had been using a dark web marketplace to purchase weapons and equipment, leading to the arrest of a supplier in Texas. While the supplier had no direct contact with Director X, the arrest provided valuable insight into the crew's supply chain. Drones and surveillance aircraft were also deployed to monitor potential targets and track the crew's movements. In one instance, a drone spotted a suspicious vehicle near a suspected safe house in rural Indiana. The vehicle was later linked to one of the crew's members, providing a crucial lead that helped narrow the search area. "They think they're invisible," one agent remarked, "but we're watching them from every angle." The human element. Despite the reliance on technology, the manhunt ultimately came down to old-fashioned detective work. Agents conducted hundreds of interviews, following up on tips from informants, witnesses, and members of the criminal underworld. Some leads were dead ends, while others provided valuable pieces of the puzzle. One informant, a former associate of the crew, revealed that Director X had a habit of using abandoned industrial sites as meeting points, leading to a series of raids on warehouses and factories across the Midwest. The task force also relied on psychological profiling to understand Director X and predict his next move. Behavioral analysts studied his actions, looking for clues about his personality, motivations, and vulnerabilities. "He's a control freak," one profiler concluded. "He plans everything down to the last detail, but that also means he's predictable in certain ways. If we can figure out his patterns, we can anticipate his next move." The challenges. The manhunt was not without its challenges. The Phantom crew's use of compartmentalization and strict operational security made it difficult to gather actionable intelligence. Even when arrests were made, the suspects often had little information to offer. "They don't know who X is," Agent Whitman explained. "They only know their piece of the puzzle, and that's by design." The crew's mobility also posed a significant challenge. They moved frequently, using stolen vehicles and fake IDs to avoid detection. Safe houses were abandoned as soon as they were compromised, and the crew seemed to have an uncanny ability to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. In one frustrating instance, agents raided a suspected hideout in St. Louis, only to find that the crew had fled just hours earlier, leaving behind only empty duffel bags and a taunting note, "Too slow, X." The public's fear and frustration added another layer of pressure. The media covered the manhunt relentlessly, with headlines like "Phantom Crew Still at Large" and "Who is Director X?" dominating the news cycle. Citizens demanded answers and politicians called for swift action. The task force was under constant scrutiny, and every setback felt like a public failure. "We're not just fighting the crew," one agent said. "We're fighting the clock, the media, and the weight of public expectation." Breakthroughs and close calls. Despite the challenges, the task force made significant progress. A breakthrough came when agents intercepted a shipment of weapons destined for the crew. The shipment, traced to a smuggling ring in Arizona, provided valuable intelligence about the crew's supply chain and led to the arrest of several key intermediaries. Another breakthrough came when a forensic analysis of the crew's abandoned vehicles revealed traces of a rare type of industrial lubricant, which was later linked to a specific warehouse in Detroit. the warehouse raid was one of the most dramatic moments of the manhunt. Acting on a tip, a team of FBI agents and SWAT officers stormed the building expecting to find the crew. Instead, they discovered a makeshift command center filled with maps, blueprints, and surveillance equipment. While the crew had once again managed to escape, the raid provided a treasure trove of information about their operations, including potential targets for future heists. In another close call, agents tracked a member of the crew to a motel in Kansas City. A tense standoff ensued, ending with the suspect's arrest. While the suspect refused to cooperate, his capture marked the first time law enforcement had apprehended a core member of the crew. The arrest provided valuable insight into the crew's inner workings and brought the task force one step closer to Director X. The turning point. The nationwide manhunt reached its turning point when the task force uncovered a critical piece of intelligence, a planned meeting between Director X and his core crew at a remote location in Colorado. The information came from a combination of intercepted communications, informant tips, and painstaking analysis of the crew's movements. It was the break the task force had been waiting for, and it set the stage for a high-stakes operation to capture the man who had eluded them for so long. As the task force prepared for the operation, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The Phantom crew had terrorized the Midwest for months, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. But now, for the first time, law enforcement had a chance to strike back. "This is it," Agent Whitman told her team. "We've been chasing shadows for months, but now we have a chance to bring them into the light. Let's finish this." The nationwide manhunt for the Phantom crew was one of the most challenging and complex operations in FBI history. It tested the limits of law enforcement's resources, technology, and resolve. But as the task force closed in on Director X, one thing was clear: the endgame was near, and the battle between law enforcement and the Phantom crew was about to reach its dramatic conclusion. The capture of the Inner Circle assassin. The arrest of one of Director X's most trusted operatives, a deadly assassin known only by her alias Raven, marked a pivotal moment in the Phantom crew investigation. Raven wasn't just another member of the crew. She was a shadowy figure who operated in the background, carrying out the most sensitive and violent tasks for Director X. Her capture was not only a major victory for the FBI, but also a rare glimpse into the inner workings of the Phantom crew and the mind of their enigmatic leader. The legend of Raven's reputation preceded her. Among law enforcement and the criminal underworld alike, she was known as a ghost, silent, efficient, and utterly ruthless. She was believed to be responsible for several high-profile murders linked to the Phantom crew, including the execution of Michael Harris, the key witness in the Milwaukee heist. Witnesses described her as cold and calculating, someone who could blend into a crowd one moment and strike with deadly precision the next. Her identity was a mystery. No one knew her real name, her background, or even what she looked like. The only consistent detail was her signature, a small black feather left at the scene of her kills, a chilling calling card that earned her the nickname Raven. For months the FBI had been chasing rumors about Raven, piecing together fragments of information from informants and intercepted communications. She was believed to be Director X's most loyal lieutenant, entrusted with tasks that required absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty. Some speculated that she was more than just an operative, that she might be the key to uncovering Director X's true identity. "If we find Raven," Special Agent Sarah Whitman told her team, "we might finally get to X." The breakthrough. The breakthrough in the hunt for Raven came from an unexpected source, a low-level arms dealer arrested in Chicago. During his interrogation, the dealer revealed that he had recently sold a custom-made sniper rifle to a woman who matched Raven's description. The transaction had taken place in a secluded warehouse, and while the dealer didn't know her name, he remembered her cold demeanor and the way she had inspected the weapon with expert precision. "She wasn't like the usual buyers," he said. "She knew exactly what she wanted, and she didn't waste any time." The FBI immediately began tracking the rifle, hoping it would lead them to Raven. Their efforts paid off when the weapon was linked to a series of surveillance photos taken near a suspected Phantom crew safehouse in Denver. The photos showed a woman entering and leaving the building, her face obscured by a hood and sunglasses. While the images were grainy, analysts were able to match her height, build, and movements to previous descriptions of Raven. It was the first solid lead the task force had on her whereabouts, and they wasted no time in planning their next move: the Sting operation. The FBI launched a carefully coordinated sting operation to capture Raven. Knowing that she was highly skilled and likely armed, they approached the mission with extreme caution. Surveillance teams were deployed to monitor the safe house while undercover agents posed as delivery drivers and passers-by to gather intelligence. After several days of observation, the task force identified a pattern in Raven's movements. She left the safe house every evening around 8 p.m., always taking a different route but ultimately ending up at a small diner on the outskirts of the city. The diner became the focal point of the operation. Agents set up hidden cameras and stationed plainclothes officers inside, blending in with the regular patrons. On the night of the operation, a team of FBI SWAT officers waited nearby, ready to move in at a moment's notice. The plan was simple: wait for Raven to arrive, confirm her identity, and apprehend her before she could react. At 8:15 p.m. Raven entered the diner just as expected. She was dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans, her hood pulled up over her head. She took a seat in the corner facing the entrance and ordered a cup of coffee. Her demeanor was calm, almost casual, but the agents watching her knew better. This was a woman who had evaded capture for months, who had killed without hesitation, and who was likely armed and ready to fight if necessary. The signal to move came when Raven reached into her jacket, possibly for a weapon. The SWAT team stormed the diner, their weapons drawn, shouting for her to put her hands up. For a moment, it seemed like she might resist. Her hand froze inside her jacket, and her eyes darted toward the nearest exit. But then, as if realizing she was outnumbered, she slowly raised her hands and allowed herself to be taken into custody. The entire operation lasted less than a minute, but for the agents involved, it felt like an eternity. The interrogation Raven's arrest was a major victory, but it was only the beginning. The FBI knew that getting her to talk would be a challenge. She was a professional, trained to resist interrogation, and her loyalty to Director X was unquestionable. For the first 48 hours, she refused to say a word, sitting silently in the interrogation room with an expression of cold indifference. "She's like a statue," one agent remarked. "It's like she doesn't even care that she's been caught." Special Agent Whitman took a different approach. Instead of trying to intimidate Raven, she appealed to her sense of self-preservation. "You're smart," Whitman told her. "You know how this ends if you don't cooperate. Director X isn't going to save you. He's probably already planning to cut his losses and move on. But if you help us, we can help you. You don't have to go down with him." It took days of careful questioning, but eventually Raven began to crack. She didn't give up Director X directly. Her loyalty to him was too strong. But she provided valuable information about the Phantom Crew's operations. She confirmed the existence of several safe houses, identified key members of the crew, and revealed details about their next planned heist. Most importantly, she hinted at a possible location for Director X, a remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies that he used as a meeting point with his inner circle. The aftermath. Raven's capture was a turning point in the investigation. Her information allowed the task force to dismantle several key parts of the Phantom Crew's network, including their supply chain and communication channels. It also brought them closer than ever to Director X, whose identity and location remained the ultimate prize. "Raven was the linchpin," Agent Whitman said. "She was the closest person to X, and now she's in our custody. It's only a matter of time before we get to him." The arrest also sent shockwaves through the Phantom Crew. For the first time, their sense of invincibility was shattered. Members of the crew began to panic, abandoning safe houses and cutting ties with one another in an effort to avoid capture. The once cohesive organization began to fracture, and the FBI seized the opportunity to exploit their weaknesses. For Raven, the future was uncertain. She faced a long list of charges, including multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and armed robbery. But her cooperation with the FBI earned her some leniency, and she was eventually placed in a high-security prison under a new identity. Whether she truly regretted her actions or was simply trying to save herself remained a mystery, but one thing was clear. Her days as Director X's most trusted assassin were over. The capture of Raven was a major victory for the FBI, but the war against the Phantom Crew was far from over. "We've taken out one of their strongest pieces," Agent Whitman said, "but the king is still on the board, and we're not stopping until we take him down." The final showdown. The hunt for Director X had been long and grueling, but after months of relentless investigation, the FBI task force finally had their chance to bring the elusive mastermind to justice. The final confrontation between law enforcement and the Phantom Crew's leader was not just the culmination of a nationwide manhunt, it was a battle of wits, strategy, and sheer determination. For Special Agent Sarah Whitman and her team, it was the moment they had been working toward, the moment when all the pieces of the puzzle would come together. But no one could have predicted just how dangerous and explosive the final showdown would be. The lead that changed everything. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Raven, the captured assassin and trusted lieutenant of Director X. After weeks of interrogation, she finally provided a critical piece of information, a location. She revealed that Director X had a remote hideout deep in the Colorado Rockies, a cabin that he used as a safe haven and a meeting point for his inner circle. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by dense forest and rugged terrain, making it the perfect place to disappear. Raven's information was corroborated by intercepted communications and satellite imagery, which showed signs of recent activity in the area. For the task force, this was the lead they had been waiting for. "This is it," Agent Whitman told her team during a tense briefing. "We've been chasing shadows for months, but now we have a chance to bring X into the light. This is our one shot, and we're not going to miss it." The plan. The operation to capture Director X was one of the most complex and high-stakes missions the FBI had ever undertaken. The cabin's remote location posed significant challenges, and the team knew that Director X would be prepared for an assault. He was a meticulous planner, someone who always stayed one step ahead, and the task force couldn't afford to underestimate him. The plan involved a multi-pronged approach. A team of FBI SWAT officers would approach the cabin on foot, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. Meanwhile, a second team would set up a perimeter to prevent any escape. Drones equipped with thermal imaging would provide real-time surveillance, while snipers positioned on nearby ridges would offer support if needed. The goal was to capture Director X alive, but the team was prepared for the possibility of a violent confrontation. "This isn't just another raid," Whitman reminded her team. "This is the man who's been pulling the strings, the man who's killed innocent people and terrorized entire communities. He's not going to go down without a fight. Stay sharp, stay focused, and remember, we're bringing him in, no matter what." The approach. The operation began in the early hours of the morning under the cover of a moonless sky. The SWAT team moved silently through the forest, their movements carefully coordinated to avoid triggering any alarms or traps. The air was cold and still, the only sounds the crunch of boots on snow and the occasional rustle of branches. Tension was high, but the team was disciplined and focused. They knew that one wrong move could alert Director X and jeopardize the entire mission. As they approached the cabin, the team spotted signs of activity, a faint glow of light from the windows, smoke rising from the chimney, and the sound of faint voices inside. Thermal imaging confirmed the presence of at least 3 individuals, one of whom was believed to be Director X. The team moved into position, surrounding the cabin and preparing for the breach. At exactly 3 a.m., the signal was given. The SWAT team stormed the cabin, their weapons drawn and their voices booming as they shouted commands. "FBI, hands in the air, don't move!" The initial breach was met with chaos. Inside the cabin, Director X and his associates reacted instantly, grabbing weapons and opening fire. The first few seconds were a blur of gunfire and shouting as the team pushed forward, clearing each room with precision. Director X was nowhere to be seen. As the team secured the cabin, they discovered a hidden trapdoor leading to an underground bunker. It was clear that Director X had planned for this moment, creating an escape route in case of a raid. The team quickly descended into the bunker, navigating a maze of narrow tunnels and dimly lit corridors. The air was thick with tension, every corner a potential ambush. The standoff. The pursuit led the team to a large underground chamber, where Director X was waiting. He stood in the center of the room, a pistol in one hand and a detonator in the other. Around him were several barrels of explosives, rigged to blow at the push of a button. His face was calm, almost smug, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "Welcome to the endgame," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You've been chasing me for months, and now here we are, but I'm not going to make it easy for you." Agent Whitman stepped forward, her weapon trained on him. "It's over, X," she said firmly. "There's nowhere left to run. Put the gun down and step away from the detonator." Director X laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you've won? You think taking me down will stop this? The Phantom crew isn't just me, it's an idea, a system. You can kill me, but you can't kill what I've built." The standoff was tense, the room filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of the explosives. Whitman knew that one wrong move could trigger a disaster, but she also knew that she couldn't let Director X escape. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We can't undo what you've done, but we can make sure you never hurt anyone again. This is your last chance. Surrender or we'll take you down." For a moment it seemed like Director X might comply. He lowered the pistol slightly, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then, in a sudden burst of movement, he raised the detonator and pressed the button. The explosion. The room erupted in chaos as the explosives detonated. The blast was deafening, sending shockwaves through the bunker and collapsing part of the ceiling. The SWAT team scrambled for cover, their training and instincts kicking in as debris rained down around them. Miraculously, the explosives had been rigged to create a diversion rather than a full-scale collapse, allowing the team to survive the blast. In the confusion, Director X attempted to escape through another tunnel, but he was intercepted by Agent Whitman and a small group of agents. A brief but intense firefight ensued, ending with Director X being shot in the leg and subdued. As he lay on the ground, bleeding and defeated, Whitman approached him, her weapon still trained on him. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and determination. "You're done." The aftermath. The capture of Director X marked the end of the Phantom Crew's reign of terror. In the days that followed, the FBI dismantled the remaining elements of the crew's network, arresting dozens of associates and seizing millions of dollars in stolen assets. The public breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that the man who had orchestrated so much violence and chaos was finally behind bars. For Agent Whitman and her team, the victory was bittersweet. They had achieved their goal, but the cost had been high, lives had been lost, and the scars of the investigation would linger for years to come. "We did what we had to do," Whitman said in a press conference. "We brought him to justice. But this isn't just about one man, it's about making sure something like this never happens again." As Director X awaited trial, the full extent of his crimes came to light. He was charged with dozens of counts of murder, robbery, and conspiracy, and he faced the possibility of multiple life sentences. But even in captivity, he remained defiant, refusing to cooperate and showing no remorse for his actions. "You think you've won," he told Whitman during a final interrogation, "but this isn't the end, it's just the beginning." For the FBI, the capture of Director X was a hard-fought victory, a testament to their perseverance and dedication. But as they celebrated their success, they knew that the fight against organized crime was far from over. The Phantom Crew might have been dismantled, but the shadow it cast would linger for years to come. And for Agent Whitman, the case would always be a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos, and the price of justice in a world filled with darkness. The testimony and the verdict. The arrest of Director X marked the end of a nationwide manhunt, but it was far from the end of the story. The trial of the enigmatic leader of the Phantom Crew became one of the most high-profile criminal cases in modern American history. It was a spectacle that captivated the nation, a courtroom drama that revealed the inner workings of a criminal empire and the mind of the man who had orchestrated it all. For the victims, their families, and the law enforcement officers who had worked tirelessly to bring him to justice, the trial was a chance to finally see Director X held accountable for his crimes. But it was also a battle of wits, as the defense sought to exploit every legal loophole to save their client from the harshest punishment. The pre-trial chaos. Even before the trial began, the case against Director X was fraught with challenges. The sheer scale of his crimes, spanning multiple states involving dozens of murders, robberies, and acts of terrorism, meant that the prosecution had to sift through mountains of evidence. Thousands of pages of documents, hours of surveillance footage, and testimony from dozens of witnesses had to be compiled into a cohesive narrative that could withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. The defense, led by a team of high-profile attorneys, wasted no time in mounting their strategy. They argued that much of the evidence was circumstantial, that the prosecution couldn't definitively prove Director X's direct involvement in many of the crimes. They also sought to suppress key pieces of evidence, claiming that they had been obtained through illegal means. The defense's goal was clear: to cast doubt on the prosecution's case and paint Director X as a scapegoat for a system that had failed to stop the Phantom Crew. The media frenzy surrounding the case only added to the chaos. Every development was dissected on the nightly news, with pundits debating the strength of the prosecution's case and the likelihood of a conviction. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, some demanding the death penalty for Director X, others claiming that he was being unfairly targeted. The trial hadn't even started, and already, it was shaping up to be one of the most contentious in recent memory. The testimony. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and a heavy security presence. Director X, whose real name was revealed to be Alexander Cross, sat at the defense table, his demeanor calm and composed. He wore a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, and his expression betrayed no emotion. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and violence he had unleashed as the leader of the Phantom Crew. The prosecution's case was built around a combination of physical evidence, witness testimony, and the statements of former crew members who had turned informants. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was the testimony of Raven, the captured assassin who had been Director X's most trusted operative. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Raven took the stand and provided a chilling account of the Phantom Crew's operations. Alexander Cross wasn't just the leader, Raven testified. He was the architect. Every heist, every murder, every move we made, it all came from him. He controlled everything, down to the smallest detail, and if you crossed him, you didn't live to tell about it. Raven's testimony was supported by other former crew members, who described how Director X had recruited them, trained them, and used fear and violence to maintain control. They recounted stories of secret meetings, coded messages, and the brutal punishments meted out to those who disobeyed. One witness, a former getaway driver, described how Director X had personally ordered the execution of a crew member who had botched a heist. He didn't just give the order, the witness said. He watched. He wanted to make sure the message was clear. The prosecution also presented forensic evidence linking Director X to several crime scenes, including fingerprints, DNA, and surveillance footage. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a handwritten journal found in his Colorado hideout, which contained detailed plans for future heists and notes on the crew's operations. The journal, written in Director X's meticulous handwriting, was a roadmap of his criminal empire, the defense's strategy. The defense faced an uphill battle, but they were determined to fight. Their strategy focused on discrediting the witnesses, many of whom were former criminals with their own agendas. They argued that Raven and the other informants had fabricated their stories in exchange for leniency, and that their testimony couldn't be trusted. They also sought to portray Director X as a scapegoat, claiming that the Phantom Crew was a decentralized organization and that their client had been unfairly targeted as its leader. In a surprising move, the defense called Director X to the stand. It was a risky strategy, but one that they hoped would humanize him in the eyes of the jury. During his testimony, Alexander Cross denied being the leader of the Phantom Crew, claiming that he was a legitimate businessman who had been framed by disgruntled former associates. "I'm not a saint," he admitted, "but I'm not the monster they're making me out to be. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't order anyone to kill. This is a witch hunt, plain and simple." Cross's testimony was calm and measured, but it was clear that the jury wasn't convinced. The prosecution countered with evidence that directly contradicted his claims, including intercepted communications and financial records that tied him to the crew's activities. "He can deny it all he wants," Agent Whitman said during a press conference, "but the evidence speaks for itself." The verdict. After months of testimony, cross-examinations, and legal wrangling, the case went to the jury. The deliberations lasted for 5 days, during which the nation held its breath. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom was silent, the tension palpable. Guilty. The word echoed through the room as the judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts, including multiple charges of murder, armed robbery, conspiracy, and racketeering. Alexander Cross, the man known as Director X, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He simply sat there, his hands folded in front of him, his face a mask of indifference. The sentencing phase of the trial was equally dramatic. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that Cross's crimes were so heinous that no other punishment would suffice. The defense pleaded for life imprisonment, claiming that execution would only make him a martyr. In the end, the judge handed down the harshest sentence possible: death by lethal injection. The aftermath. The trial of Director X was a landmark moment in the fight against organized crime. It exposed the inner workings of the Phantom Crew, brought closure to the victims and their families, and sent a clear message that no one was above the law. For Agent Whitman and her team, it was the culmination of months of hard work and sacrifice. "Justice has been served," Whitman said in a statement. "But this isn't just about one man. It's about all the lives that were lost, all the families that were torn apart. This verdict is for them." In the years that followed, the case became a textbook example of how to dismantle a criminal empire. Law enforcement agencies across the country studied the investigation, hoping to replicate its success in their own battles against organized crime. Meanwhile, Alexander Cross remained on death row, his appeals dragging on for years. He continued to deny his guilt, insisting that he had been framed, but his words carried little weight. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the world had moved on. For the victims, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but also a reminder of the pain they had endured. "He took so much from us," said one survivor, "but at least now, he can't hurt anyone else." The trial of Director X was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning, a moment when justice prevailed over fear and chaos. It was a reminder that even the most powerful criminals could be brought to justice, and that the rule of law would always triumph in the end. The social fallout. The capture, trial, and eventual sentencing of Director X sent shockwaves through American society, leaving a profound and lasting impact on the public, law enforcement, and the broader cultural landscape. The Phantom Crew's reign of terror had not only exposed vulnerabilities in the nation's security systems, but also forced a reckoning with deeper societal issues, including the rise of organized crime, the erosion of public trust, and the psychological scars left on communities affected by the crew's violence. The aftermath of the case was a period of reflection, reform, and for many, a struggle to rebuild a sense of normalcy. The public's reaction. The Phantom Crew's crimes had gripped the nation for months, and the trial of Director X became a media spectacle that dominated headlines. When the verdict was announced, there was a collective sense of relief, but it was tempered by lingering fear and unease. For many Americans, the case was a stark reminder of how easily a well-organized criminal enterprise could infiltrate and exploit the system. The Phantom Crew had robbed banks, murdered witnesses, and evaded capture for years, all while operating in plain sight. Their ability to outmaneuver law enforcement for so long left many questioning the effectiveness of the institutions meant to protect them. In the immediate aftermath of the trial, public opinion was divided. While most celebrated the FBI's success in dismantling the crew and bringing Director X to justice, others were critical of the systemic failures that had allowed the crew to thrive in the first place. Talk shows, podcasts, and social media platforms buzzed with debates about the case, with some commentators praising the bravery of law enforcement and others calling for sweeping reforms to address the root causes of organized crime. The psychological impact on the public was also significant. In the cities and towns where the Phantom Crew had operated, fear lingered long after the crew was dismantled. Banks installed additional security measures including armed guards, bulletproof glass, and advanced surveillance systems. Customers, once accustomed to the routine of daily banking, now entered branches with a sense of caution, their eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. "It's like we're all waiting for the next Phantom Crew," one bank employee said. "Even though they're gone, the fear hasn't left." The impact on law enforcement. For law enforcement agencies across the country, the Phantom Crew case was both a wake-up call and a turning point. The crew's ability to operate with such precision and brutality had exposed significant gaps in the nation's approach to combating organized crime. In response, the FBI and other agencies launched a series of internal reviews to identify and address these weaknesses. One of the most glaring issues was the lack of coordination between federal, state, and local law enforcement. The Phantom Crew had exploited jurisdictional boundaries, committing crimes in multiple states and using the resulting bureaucratic delays to their advantage. In the wake of the case, the FBI established new protocols for interagency collaboration, including the creation of regional task forces dedicated to tracking and dismantling organized crime networks. These task forces brought together agents from different agencies, ensuring that information was shared more efficiently and that investigations could move forward without unnecessary delays. The case also highlighted the need for better technology and training. The Phantom Crew had used encrypted communication, burner phones, and other advanced tactics to evade detection, outpacing the tools available to law enforcement at the time. In response, the FBI invested heavily in upgrading its cybercrime division, hiring experts in digital forensics and encryption to stay ahead of future threats. Training programs were also expanded to teach agents how to recognize and counter the tactics used by sophisticated criminal organizations. Despite these reforms, the case left a lasting mark on the morale of law enforcement. The months-long manhunt, the loss of lives, and the sheer brutality of the crew's crimes had taken a toll on the agents involved. Many spoke of the psychological strain of chasing a shadowy enemy, of feeling like they were always one step behind. "It wasn't just a job," one agent said. "It was personal. Every time we found another victim, it felt like we'd failed. Even when we finally caught him, it didn't feel like a victory, it just felt like the end of a nightmare." The cultural legacy. The Phantom Crew case also left an indelible mark on American culture. It became the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood film, each offering its own interpretation of the events. The public's fascination with Director X and his crew was fueled by their almost mythic status as criminal masterminds, a narrative that blurred the line between fact and fiction. While the FBI worked to portray Director X as a cold-blooded killer, some in the media romanticized him as a modern-day outlaw, a figure who had defied the system and paid the ultimate price. This romanticization sparked controversy, with critics arguing that it glorified violence and undermined the suffering of the crew's victims. "These weren't Robin Hood figures," one journalist wrote. "They didn't steal from the rich to give to the poor, they stole for themselves and they left a trail of death and destruction in their wake. We shouldn't be turning them into folk heroes." The case also sparked a broader conversation about the nature of crime and punishment in America. Some saw the Phantom Crew as a symptom of deeper societal issues, including economic inequality, systemic corruption, and the erosion of community ties. Director X didn't operate in a vacuum, one sociologist argued. He exploited a system that was already broken, a system that allowed him to recruit desperate people and turn them into killers. If we want to prevent the next Phantom Crew, we need to address the conditions that make organized crime possible. The victims' struggle for closure. For the victims and their families, the end of the trial was not the end of their pain. The Phantom Crew had left a trail of devastation, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would take years to heal. Survivors of the crew's heists spoke of lingering trauma, of nightmares and panic attacks that made it difficult to return to normal life. Families who had lost loved ones struggled to find closure, even with Director X behind bars. Some victims channeled their grief into advocacy, pushing for stronger protections for witnesses and victims of violent crime. The murder of Michael Harris, the key witness in the Milwaukee heist, became a rallying cry for reform, leading to the passage of new legislation aimed at improving witness protection programs. "We can't bring Michael back," his sister said during a press conference, "but we can make sure that no one else has to go through what he did." A nation changed. In the years following the Phantom Crew case, its impact continued to ripple through American society. It became a symbol of both the dangers of organized crime and the resilience of those who fought to stop it. For law enforcement, it was a reminder of the importance of vigilance and adaptability in the face of evolving threats. For the public, it was a cautionary tale about the fragility of safety and the need to remain vigilant. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case was its reminder of the human cost of crime. Behind the headlines and the courtroom drama were real people, victims, survivors, and the agents who had risked everything to bring a criminal empire to its knees. Their stories served as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring pursuit of justice even in the face of unimaginable darkness. Lessons and conclusion. The case of Director X and the Phantom Crew was more than just a story of crime and justice. It was a defining moment in modern American history, one that left behind a legacy of hard-earned lessons and profound reflections. The investigation, trial, and aftermath of the case revealed not only the depths of human depravity, but also the resilience of those who stood against it. It forced law enforcement, policymakers, and society at large to confront uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities in the system and the cost of complacency. As the dust settled, the nation was left to grapple with the lessons learned and the path forward. Lessons for law enforcement. For law enforcement, the Phantom Crew case was a sobering reminder of the challenges posed by modern organized crime. The crew's ability to operate with such precision and brutality exposed significant gaps in the nation's approach to combating criminal enterprises. One of the most glaring issues was the lack of coordination between agencies. The Phantom Crew had exploited jurisdictional boundaries, committing crimes across multiple states and using the resulting bureaucratic delays to their advantage. The case underscored the need for seamless collaboration between federal, state, and local law enforcement. In response, the FBI and other agencies implemented sweeping reforms. Regional task forces were established to improve communication and coordination, ensuring that information could be shared quickly and efficiently. These task forces brought together agents from different jurisdictions, creating a unified front against organized crime. "The Phantom Crew taught us that crime doesn't stop at state lines," said Special Agent Sarah Whitman, "and neither can we." The case also highlighted the importance of technology in modern policing. The Phantom Crew had used encrypted communication, burner phones, and other advanced tactics to evade detection, outpacing the tools available to law enforcement at the time. In the wake of the case, the FBI invested heavily in upgrading its cybercrime division, hiring experts in digital forensics and encryption to stay ahead of future threats. Training programs were expanded to teach agents how to recognize and counter the tactics used by sophisticated criminal organizations. But perhaps the most important lesson for law enforcement was the need for persistence and adaptability. The Phantom Crew had been a formidable adversary, constantly changing their methods and staying one step ahead of their pursuers. The task force's success in dismantling the crew was a testament to their determination and willingness to adapt. "We didn't just rely on one strategy," Whitman explained. "We kept evolving just like they did. That's what it takes to win against an enemy like this." Lessons for society. The Phantom Crew case also held important lessons for society as a whole. At its core, the crew's rise to power was a symptom of deeper societal issues including economic inequality, systemic corruption, and the erosion of community ties. Director X had exploited these vulnerabilities, recruiting desperate individuals and turning them into tools of his criminal enterprise. His ability to manipulate and control his crew was a stark reminder of how easily people can be drawn into darkness when they feel abandoned by the system. For many, the case was a wake-up call about the need to address the root causes of crime. Community leaders and policymakers began advocating for programs to combat poverty, improve education, and provide opportunities for at-risk youth. "If we want to prevent the next Phantom Crew," one sociologist argued, "we need to create a society where people don't feel like crime is their only option." The case also sparked a broader conversation about the role of the media in shaping public perception. The Phantom Crew's crimes had been sensationalized in the press, with some outlets portraying Director X as a criminal mastermind and even romanticizing his exploits. This narrative blurred the line between fact and fiction, creating a dangerous mystique around the crew. Critics argued that this kind of coverage undermined the suffering of the victims and glorified violence. "We need to be careful about the stories we tell," one journalist wrote, "because the way we talk about crime can shape the way people think about it." The cost of justice. While the capture and conviction of Director X were celebrated as a victory for justice, the case also served as a stark reminder of the cost of that justice. The Phantom Crew's reign of terror had left a trail of devastation, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would take years to heal. For the victims and their families, the end of the trial was not the end of their pain. Survivors spoke of lingering trauma, of nightmares and panic attacks that made it difficult to return to normal life. Families who had lost loved ones struggled to find closure, even with Director X behind bars. For law enforcement, the cost was equally high. The months-long manhunt, the loss of lives, and the psychological toll of chasing a shadowy enemy had left many agents grappling with burnout and PTSD. "We gave everything to this case," one agent said, "and even though we won, it didn't feel like a victory, it just felt like the end of a nightmare." The case also raised difficult questions about the balance between security and civil liberties. In their pursuit of the Phantom Crew, law enforcement had pushed the boundaries of surveillance and investigative techniques, leading to debates about the potential for abuse. While most agreed that the ends had justified the means in this case, the controversy highlighted the need for oversight and accountability in the fight against organized crime. The legacy of the Phantom Crew. The Phantom Crew case left an indelible mark on American society, becoming a symbol of both the dangers of organized crime and the resilience of those who fought to stop it. It became the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood film, each offering its own interpretation of the events. For some, the case was a cautionary tale about the fragility of safety and the need to remain vigilant. For others, it was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring pursuit of justice. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case was its reminder of the human cost of crime. Behind the headlines and the courtroom drama were real people, victims, survivors, and the agents who had risked everything to bring a criminal empire to its knees. Their stories served as a powerful reminder of the importance of compassion, resilience, and the pursuit of justice in a world filled with darkness. Conclusion. In the end, the case of Director X and the Phantom Crew was more than just a story of crime and punishment. It was a story about the choices we make as a society, the values we hold dear, and the lengths we are willing to go to protect them. It was a story about the power of perseverance, the importance of accountability, and the enduring hope that justice can prevail, even in the face of unimaginable evil. As the nation moved forward, the lessons of the Phantom Crew case continued to resonate. They served as a reminder that the fight against crime is never truly over, that vigilance and adaptability are essential, and that the pursuit of justice is a responsibility we all share. And while the scars of the case would never fully heal, they stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring belief that, in the end, good can triumph over evil.